All right. I'm going to go ahead and get started because we do have a bunch of people that need to drop at 8, and I'd like to get this done and through and have enough time for questions at the end. So I appreciate everybody joining, taking the time out of your Tuesday. I know some of you have had some other things going on. Uh, what we're going to be discussing is going to be the experiment, the status of the experiment. Also, I want to talk about some marshaling related things and then open the floor for some questions. So, introducing myself, I am Alfonso Diego Castillo de Guzman. Judging by the people on the call, I think most of you know me and I know most of you. If you don't, please go out of your way to introduce yourself to me at an event that we're all attending. For today, there we go. Our agenda is what is going on with the experiments, marshaling and armor inspections. I got some things I want to cover there based on observations over the last few months. We have a new website and some new content. And really, what I want to get from you is thinking about things that you think we should have up there. And then wrapping up, we'll have an open discussion, bring your questions. So, the experiment. And by experiments, I mean experiments. And this is news to some of us because we weren't aware that there were actually two running this last year. So, as you know, we all got removed from the experiment, and it's been kind of hush-hushed about what had happened. I am not going to be giving names, placing blame, etc. So, this is all just about the facts. So, going back to January of last year, the current experiment at the time got partially ratified into our rapier rule set. Partially ratified because almost everything made it in except the torso. What we didn't know is that a new experiment started at that point, and so many people continued with the existing experiment. The other thing that we were not made aware of or didn't know about was that there was a C&T experiment that started at the same time. Simone and I didn't find out about that until late June. The catalyst was an event that occurred in Great Western War. There was a Western fighter who had an armor an armor failure during a melee that went on for a couple of hours and ultimately culminated in a photograph that was circulated after the fact. And this photograph brought into question several things. Upon investigation, he passed the armor inspection by Western Marshals on a day of melees. That in and of itself wasn't the huge problem. The huger problem was that all these melees had more people in the melees than were allowed in the experiment at the time. He was inspected with an original outer garment. It was a tabard. That tabard got removed in the middle of the day because it got hot. And then this thin cotton shirt that the person was wearing failed in the back and had a fairly large opening that was about 15 inches long that exposed the majority of his back. So when questioning came through from Qaid, which ultimately ended up at the Earl Marshal of Society, they asked to see our records and sign-up sheets and reporting forms for the experiment. This is actually what got us removed from the experiment. So looking at it, what I discovered is that a majority of the people that actually did sign up, which weren't many of us, to be clear, did it in 2022. And 23 and 24, we had an additional, across those 2 years, 10 people sign up. At the end of the list, which spans about 3 years, we only had about 30 people signed up, 10 of them no longer living in the kingdom as of last year. So we had 20 fighters who were actually signed up for the experiment. Now, on top of that, it's the wrong experiment because technically we were supposed to change it over in 24. The worst part is the reporting form. We only had 8 people report in 2024. Now, a majority of those people were really good about reporting. We had a sum total of about 32 reports from 8 people last year. And I personally know for a fact that there were a lot more people claiming that they were part of the experiment and they were reporting. So when the Earl Marshal saw our reporting status, that's when they pulled us from the experiment. Now, one of the things, and I don't want this to change, is that we rely on the honor of the fighters. When they tell us they register and when they say that they're going to report, they're going to do the thing. And I don't want to get to a place where we're monitoring and babysitting. So what I really want us to do is really get more verbal about making sure that people are doing the thing that they say that they're doing. And I'm also open to finding better ways for us to make it easier for people to do that. So fast forward, my job was to figure out how to get us back into the experiment. And I put together a multi-part plan. One of them was education, which is pretty much what tonight's about. Setting up new signups. We now have 2 experiments. We're going to have 2 different signups, and then we're going to have 2 different reporting forms. Now, from my perspective, the really good thing is that the reporting net forms are now multi-kingdom. So everybody across the known world that's involved in these experiments are all going to be using the same 2 spreadsheets to enter their reports. The signups will be managed at the kingdom level, and every month I'll be sending both signup sheets to both of the deputies that are running the experiments.
Daryl, there's a question of do we get confirmation?
That you will on the sign up form. I believe that you do on the reporting form. I actually went through the reporting form just so I could see what it looked like. We can discuss that a little bit towards the end. But I didn't actually submit. But I'm pretty sure that the reporting forms will send you an email that you have reported. So one
The
of the
current
things
ones
that,
do.
what's that?
The current ones do.
Okay. So one of the things I wanted to cover is what is the current rapier and CNT armor requirements? So coming out of the new rule set, which came out at the end of January of last year, this is where we integrate the rapier experiment partially. So we now no longer have to wear anything on our arms, with the exception of under the hand span under the armpit heading out, and that's to protect the major arteries that are sitting in there, and then down through the groin. The rest of it for a regular rapier can be exposed. For cut and thrust, we have to have abrasion resistant on the appendages. We have to have padding on the elbow and in the hands, and then puncture proof or puncture resistant on the torso, and then rigid on the neck and above. Where this changes, and there's one thing I want to point out, and this has come up a couple of times that I've been involved in. Some of the HEMA fighters are using those partially fully enclosed masks that have the plastic, the integrated back of head protection, and they leave a little triangular gap at the neck. The deputy of the experiment and I had a long discussion about this last night. This came up in Kaid a couple of weeks ago, and the official ruling now is that there should be no exposed skin above the neck. So that little gap has to be covered, and it doesn't have to be covered by puncture proof. It just has to be covered by abrasion resistance. So those little scrunchy neck things, the stretchy ones, they will suffice. Just no exposed skin. And again, that's for CNT specifically. All right, so now that we've discussed what we are supposed to be wearing, let's talk about what the experiment is putting back into play. And so at this time, what the experiment looks like is you can't have any exposed skin on the torso, but it just needs to be abrasion resistant. So thin cotton's fine. But, and I'm looking and staring at a handful of people, and you know you are. We can't have any exposed skin around the gorget or anywhere on the torso itself. Now, this also means that we do not need to have the hand-span protection underneath the armpit either. So it really is a light cotton something over the top of the torso, and you're good as long as there's no exposed skin. So when does this apply? Single combat, completely acceptable. One or both of the opponents, we're all good. Melees is where it gets a little more tricky. Now, it used to be that the melee was only 5 max on a side. So 5x3, you were fine. 5x6, you were not. 4x6, you were not. Now it's 40 participants total. And this is actually what got us in trouble in Kaid because each of the melees that we're running had more than 50 people on the field. And so the experiment would not have come into play for that. So is everybody kind of clear on that? If there are 40 people on the field, we're good. If there are 41, we're not. And it doesn't matter how they're split up. It could be 30 on 10 and we're fine. If it's 30 on 11, then the experiment is no longer allowed. So what do we need to do? Everybody needs to go sign up. After every event, if you participated in the experiment, you need to report. The idea here, and I looked at the data that they had collected before, and they were getting a lot of reports, but the problem was is they were only getting reports when there was a problem. So it looked like the experiment was 100% failure because every report had some form of damage. Now, what they really want to stress is that they actually want to see when nothing did happen. That way we can compare, okay, for every 100 bouts, 5 ended up with severe bruising and 1 ended up with, light contusions, things like that. Those are the metrics that we're really looking to grab. The signups are actually going to be ready before February 1st. We do not start our experiment until the 1st. So I'm gonna get the signups ahead of time. That way we can actually have people signed up and be ready to participate at Hawkshaven. Oh, and at the war. All right.
Daryl, there's another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Lace-up shirts often have a small gap. Does the opening need to overlap?
Technically, yes. There's no exposed skin. That's actually the way the rule reads.
Yeah,
So,
I understand the reason for the question because a lot of them butt together,
yep,
but there's no actual overlap ensuring the coverage.
right. And, the overlap could just be a small strip of fabric hastily sewn underneath. That's fine. Again, none of this has to be puncture resistant, so we're not looking at heavy fabrics. Another option is to wear an extremely lightweight cotton shirt, a t-shirt underneath it. I think there are a bunch of things that you could do, but the point that we need to look at is no exposed skin, however that happens.
Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, if not, we can go into this in more detail at the end. All right, so as stated before, we've got 2 experiments. So the second experiment is the CNT reduced armor. So this one is a little more complicated. So the arms can be exposed, except we still need to have that 5-inch under the armpit, down the arm. So however you can manage to do that, you can leave the rest of the arm exposed. The hands, with the exception of longsword. So with longsword, you still have to have the rigid hand protection all the way up above the wrist. The legs can be exposed, and we don't need to wear shoes. So what is still covered by the experiment? So the head really doesn't change. The torso does not change, elbow padding, and then the back of the hands and the fingers should be padded as well. So this is interesting. So when does this apply? So, of course, single combat, one or both opponents. And this is what I found interesting. The melees have no limit on the size for CNT. And I honestly can't tell you why. I would have thought this would be where they would put the limitations and that rapier would have less restrictions here, but that's not the case. So in CNT, we can have as many people on the field mixed and matched however we feel.
Are melees specifically called out in the cut and thrust one at all?
Yes,
Yeah.
actually, it's specifically called out. There is no limit.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Let them know about Caillou.
So what do we need to do? Again, everybody needs to sign up. It's a separate registration. Same thing applies at the beginning of the month. I'm going to send the person running the experiment our list of participants. After every event, you're going to log your results. This is a different spreadsheet. Again, it's multi-kingdom. And I'm going to have the sign-up sheet ready for us in time so that everybody can get signed up before our first event on February 1.
Somebody's asking about cut and thrust reward.
Okay, there are two clarifications we want to double check on.
Okay.
Hand protection for non-longsword.
So I read it. I reread it. I asked Wendy, who is the person who's running it. And Wendy, if you're on here, if you want to chime in on this.
Wendy is on here.
The way that I read it is for standard swords, not long swords, that the back of the hand and the fingers still need to be padded. And so this would be like side sword, sword and shield.
The other item is you may want to specify that neck protection does not change.
No.
I'm sorry, the neck protection, what?
Does not change. This was brought up by Thomas.
Okay. I will adjust this. I actually, in my mind, the head and neck are kind of the same, but yeah,
No,
I'll add
he's
that.
right. It does need to be clarified because there are rules lawyers.
They are separate sections in the rules.
They are, and this does not supplant the rules, which is the other part that needs to be clear. This is a summation of everything to make it easy for us to have this discussion, but this does not change the rules. Everybody should be reading the rules on their own. All right. Anything else on CNT?
One question I was asking earlier, trying to get clarification on, for instance, I'll use myself as an example. Last year, when I started fencing, I signed up for the reduced torso so that I could play. So I logged my reports the few times I fought with reduced torso, but my name is still associated with the reduced armor experiment. However, I had bought penetration resistant armor and had began to fight in that. But now there's this like lag, right? I'm still signed up, but now no reports are being filed, even though I'm not fighting that way. How do we fix that?
Actually, let's be clear. Nobody is signed up at the moment.
No, I'm talking about last year. But if we go as going forward, right? If someone signs up for reduced armor, we have several new fighters that don't have it, or they're working on getting it now because we just got suspended. But so we start the experiment going forward. They sign up, right? They do their reports, but at some point, 2 or 3 months from now, they decide they'd rather have a little more armor, so they get the pen resistant armor. How do we then log that? Okay, they're no longer playing in that experiment, so we shouldn't be looking for reports from them anymore.
So one thing, that's actually a really great observation because you're right. Even the old experiment, we really didn't have a provision for I'm no longer doing.
Right, and that's where I brought up for myself last year because I didn't file under reports for most of the year because I stopped playing in the reduced armor. So,
No, this is actually a really great observation. So so to be clear, I have not created the sign up sheet yet. That's what I'm doing this weekend. While I'm doing that, I will actually figure out how we can put into that. Okay, I'm done, and allow us to do that. Because one of the things that I have to do every month is go through the list and see who's moved, who's no longer a member, and actually remove them from the spreadsheet before I send it uh, up to the people that are running the experiments.
okay, does that mean they have to be a member to participate in the experiment?
No.
Okay, sorry. The way you said removed from for if they stop being a member, I was
Well, yeah, stop being a member, move out of kingdom.
correct. Yeah, okay, left
Yeah,
the area, no problem.
left the area, right.
Stop playing, whatever.
Pick
Okay,
your flavor of they are no longer doing the thing with us.
right. There you go.
All right. One of the things I really liked, and I'm giving Wendy some props here, the CNT experiment actually did a really good job of articulating what it is that they're trying to get out of all of the reporting. So I thought I would share that with everybody. And this will kind of help us understand like what it is that they want from us and how we can help. And so I'm not going to go through this verbatim. Feel free to take a look at this on your own if you can't speed read on your screen right now. But there are a variety of things that they're looking at, weather conditions, what weapons form, to try and put together a matrix of, okay, these conditions we don't have any problems with, but these conditions we maybe do have some problems with, which might influence the decision on moving this into the regular rule set. All right, so before I move on to marshaling, inspections, and other iterata for the group that's on this call, anything else around? Hey, Wendy, go ahead.
I have a question about the, sorry, I have a question about the 5 inches on the armpit. Is that a West Kingdom specific standard, or are you using the society standard, which is 4 inches?
I'm using the society standard, and I missed that it moved to 4 inches. I was always told 5.
Yeah, it's been four for a little while. I just pulled up the rule set to make sure that I wasn't forgetting something, but I believe it's the torso, including the abdomen, down to and including the groin in front, and the inner arm of the 4 inches below the armpit.
Yes, I don't know if you can see it, but the image that I just put on the screen, that's what it is showing as well, although it's not showing 4 inches specifically, but you can kind of see what's going on with the under the armpit here. Update this to say 4 inches.
Mongoose had a question about that. How does that apply to shorter fighters? I mean, is this standardized to 6 foot tall people?
No, it's 4 inches is 4 inches.
Okay.
That's across everybody. I mean, that's been a part of the rule set for quite a while. It's part of the normal armor requirements society-wide.
So even if somebody has short upper arms,
Yep.
it's still 4 inches.
Well,
Yeah.
look at this on Kendrick. I mean, this would be ridiculously useless on a guy Kendrick size, right?
Yeah.
It's basically trying to protect that artery.
Yeah.
Oh, I understand that. Yeah.
That would be a good thing if you wanted to bump that up to the society to let the folks in Lilius's office take a look at that as they're rewriting rules. Rapier.sca.org. She's pretty responsive, so send that kind of feedback over to her so that she can have it as they're doing the rules rewrites.
The only problem I can see from an inspection standpoint on variable lengths in the armpit is how do we judge that? It's easier to just take a tape measure and go, yep, you're 4 inches, you're good, as opposed to, oh, well, this person's 6 foot tall, you only need, you need 7 inches, and this person's 4'9", you only need 2 inches. That's a little hard to judge.
Yeah, I found it useful to use the 4 inches, but if I see somebody who's not covered properly, I can always recommend it. I always say, you might want to go a little bigger than 4 inches because you're a big guy.
All right. Anybody have anything else before we change subjects?
So I had a question based on you guys were talking about, if you have to pull out of, if you decide to pull out of the experiment or whatever, you have you need to be taken off the reporting list. Is that how we want to treat that? Like, is it the assumption that if I'm participating in reduced armor, I'm always in reduced armor? Because I
No.
mean, there's like, it's a cold event. I'm happy wearing my gambeson, which passes puncture resist, that kind of thing.
Right, exactly. So, no, that is actually another great question. But my understanding, and Wendy, feel free to jump in here, is that if you participate in the experiment at an event, you should report,
Right.
regardless of the outcome of that. But if you do not, then you do not need to report for that event.
Right. I just don't want that to be, taken as a bad thing or something like that. Like last year, there was a complaint about not getting enough reports, and it was, well, it's winter. People
Right.
aren't as worried
Well, yeah,
about
but I mean,
losing
let's be
layers.
clear. The complaint was last year we had a sum total of 15 reports,
Right.
right?
So
So
I can add a little more clarification to that if you'd like.
please.
So I'm in Caid, so I'm your southern neighbor, and
Right.
we get blistering hot, as those of you who have been to Great West can attest. Our desert areas also get near freezing during the winter time, and so we don't get a lot of reporting in the winter. However, if you're part of the experiment and somebody is wearing no sleeves for whatever reason, you can still give us a report, and that report could be, it's tailored in such a way that we're looking for the weather, we're looking for feedback of, I fought somebody unarmed who was in reduced armor. I didn't have any issues. I was fully armored. I didn't think the temperature warranted going down in armor. We see this kind of a mixed thing all the time. Also for marshals, if you're marshaling, you're not actually technically participating, but you are marshaling. So there's a section if you aren't fighting at all, but you are marshaling about. We'd like you to fill that out as well. And I believe that both the reduced torso and I know the cut and thrust, so both experimental programs do have those questions. So even if you aren't fighting, the reason is if we don't have enough data, then they'll either continue to let the experiments run for no end date until we get enough numbers saying it's safe, or they'll pull the plug on the program. So the form should take maybe about 5 minutes to fill out. So we're hoping that we've made it less arduous for people to make those submissions. But if you are in the program, it's your decision whether or not you want to armor up or not armor up. We don't really care. If you're fighting against somebody who is armored down, according to the program, then the feedback that we're looking for you is, yeah, we had a great time, nobody died, it's great. Or we were fighting outside, it was 115 degrees. The fact that we didn't have as much armor on really allowed us to play longer. And we know that winter's a factor. So we're expecting that bell curve of less in the winter, but as soon as spring starts hitting, especially, for us more climate friendly areas, that we should start seeing reports around the end of March, April. And if you're inside, you don't necessarily need to armor up if you're fighting inside. So some of the kingdoms that are part of the program that have indoor sites in the winter, we want to see those reports as well. Does that help?
Does. Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Wendy. So you said that there was a place to report when you're fighting someone in reduced armor. Is
Yep.
there anything there about choosing different targets because they were unarmored, like choosing to not strike the uncovered leg? And
Yeah. I mean, if as a fighter you want to report that you're having to be more cautious because somebody is more armored, or you don't feel comfortable doing regular sparring with someone that's unarmored, you kind of have a couple of courses of reaction of action. One, you could tell us that it's like, I don't really feel comfortable fighting somebody who's not armored, and I'm having to think more, and I'm choosing different targets. That's a perspective I don't think we're seeing a lot of. So if that's something that applies to you, absolutely go ahead and report it. But you as a fighter have the right to refuse to fight anybody who is not in society standard minimums or your kingdom's minimums. So kingdoms can have more stringent requirements than what society has. They can't have less. So, but you as the fighter, it's an experiment. As a fighter, you have the right of refusal without retaliation. So if you say, I don't want to fight against it in this experiment or against this fighter who's part of the experiment, it makes me uncomfortable, then the fighter either has to yield or they have to go armored up because the standard is the armor that we have in the handbook. The experiment is a nicety and not a necessity. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, great. Wendy, I actually really appreciate you being on this call. I want to move on. Let's get back to this topic of conversation towards the end. I want to make sure that we can get through all the slides, and we're just about halfway. I think the rest of this is going to go fairly quick. All right. I want to cover a couple of things on inspections. Specifically, this is, pre-fighting, right? What I want to start seeing us do is developing a standard pattern, and a couple of things come out of this. One, we don't miss anything. We don't forget to do something. And two, if everybody's doing the same thing, the fighters are going to be expecting the same thing. And I think between the marshals doing it the same way and the fighters expecting it to be done the same way, that some things won't get missed. My observation towards the end of this year is that we're all getting a little sloppy around making sure that everything is covered. And so the pattern that I'm recommending that we all adopt is starting with the question of, are they participating in the experiments? One of the challenges that we had at Great Western is the lack of understanding on the fighters' part around what the experiment entailed and when it was and was not in effect. So, very quick question, do they understand what the experiment is? Feel free to ask, don't look for trick questions. We're not trying to fool anybody or find anybody, not playing well with us, but remind them that we're in this experiment because we're all participating, and participation doesn't just mean I get to come out without my shirt on. It means I'm going to tell, I'm going to report. Then we switch to, weapons and shields. We're looking for tips, edges, for snagging and rust. Rust is one thing I think I want to cover a little bit more in the spring. Body requirement, gender appropriate, gorget, mask and helm, padding, helm off. Start with the helm off. Is the padding and everything there? Does the inside of it look like it's getting worn and somewhat dangerous? With the helmet on, or the mask on, does it touch them? Is the skin covered? Then, finally, at some point, we're either going to have to sign a card or get an inspection sticker or something on it. Hey, Kikaku, yeah, what's up?
Since we're kind of going over all of this, I wanted to see if there is a recommendation for how we approach the gender appropriate protection. Like, is there standardized wording that we can use, things like that? Because I know that some people have found, there's been a bunch of different things tossed around, and sometimes it gets awkward and sometimes it's not. So,
Wolfheart has my favorite kind of standard thing that I've heard from anybody. Wolfheart has a pretty good one. I'm planning on actually documenting that and putting it up on the website. And I think that will have what you're looking for. If anybody else on the call has any suggestions for Kikaku, I'd love to hear them.
I just
Otherwise,
I just usually ask, do they have appropriate groin protection? That covers, pretty much anybody, I would think.
I got asked, do you have your PPE?
There you go. Yeah.
I mean, and this is part of why I want to make sure, because there are a couple of suggestions that I've seen, like Wendy had suggested that, she uses, are you wearing the rigid protection appropriate for your body, right?
Right. Wolfheart's
I would just like to see something standardized, right? Because somebody might say, are you wearing your appropriate PPE, and not understand, like the person being asked the question might not understand what exactly that means in that specific case. So.
Yeah, I agree. Why don't you and I touch base after this? Because I might tap you to help me put this together.
Sure.
Yeah, I modified mine from Wolfheart basically and just say, are you wearing the appropriate protection for your gender?
Yeah.
And they get to decide about their gender that way.
Right. And that seems to be well received from my impressions.
Yeah, we pulled gender out of it. We just said body, because that made it truly gender neutral. We had some of our folks who have transitioned, who are trans, work with us at the marshalate level to suggest that wording, as it was the most neutral as we could get.
Yeah, and I like that over appropriate for your gender, right?
You're taking notes, right? Joe?
Yeah, I got that one.
Cool. All right. So we'll move from inspections into field marshaling. And I have split this up into two different scenarios. So our events. I actually participated in an error on one of these, and this is why this list came up. So in every round, make sure that the fighter has all the equipment that they were inspected with. Also, make sure that they do not have live steel on their person while they're standing on the field with their sports equipment. And then, of course, and I think everybody's pretty good about this last one, make sure everyone checks their tips. One thing in the Western side, I love that marshals are, and William, this has been great from you especially, report to me when tips fail. One thing I have seen is in the last 6 months, I've seen an acceleration in tips coming off, which is starting to make me question if we have some issues with glues and specific kinds of tape. So please report tip failures, even if it's like just the glue fail on the tape around it. I need to know these kinds of things because, like I said, I am seeing a lot more of these being reported. Experiments, getting back to the inspections, if they claim they signed up, remind them to report always. And this applies to all the experiments. I think we have a couple of people on here who are part of the weapons experiments that we have too. Same thing applies to those, even though I'm focusing on the reduced armor experiments. This also applies to the all the different weapons experiments that we have going on. Now, inter-kingdom events, this changes a little bit. And one of the changes that I want to make, and we've not had a rigid structure around this, and I want to change that. At an inter-kingdom event, if there are more than 2 Western fighters, and we're going to have one of 2 scenarios, I'm going to ask somebody, which I've already done for the upcoming war down south, I'm going to ask somebody to be the designated senior marshal. If I haven't done that, everybody should get together. You all know who we are, right? And find out, who the senior marshal is going to be responsible for the West. Everybody should identify that person, and then that person has to connect with the Kingdom Marshalate. Several things have to happen here. We have to confirm if the experiments are honored in that. Now, I will say, and Wendy and I have discussed, Kaid does not honor these experiments, so reduced armor does not apply when we're down in Kaid. Just for cut and thrust.
Specifically, torso reduced. Our kingdom, it will probably be a very long time before we allow it in this kingdom, and that comes from the Earl Marshal down. We are heavily participating in the cut and thrust reduced armor, but reduced torso is not allowed in Kaid at this time.
So you all heard it directly from Wendy. The other challenge that we've had is proof of authorization. So the marshal in charge for the West needs to find out what that kingdom's proof of auth is required and needs to articulate that to our fighters, and our fighters need to honor that. We're not going to have a situation where somebody gets vouched for by somebody else. That puts everybody in jeopardy and can raise some questions, especially if something bad happens. So, whatever proof is required by the kingdom that we're in, everybody's got to do that.
Bring your cards with you.
Bring your cards with you, take pictures of them. We're starting to do this more and more, especially as our ranks grow and grow and new faces are popping up all the time. At the end of the event, just send me a report. I don't need pages and pages. I really just need how many fighters were there. Did they allow the experiment? Were there any issues? And issues can mean anything from somebody called somebody a name to, hey, this person passed out and ended up having to get dragged off the field. And finally, and most importantly, you are representing the West when you are at an Interkingdom event. So conduct yourselves accordingly. All right. Any questions, anything related around that? We're actually doing okay. So I don't really have much in here. I just want to bring up, we got a new website that is going to be coming out and some new sections for us in it. And I'm planning on adding some content. Some of it is going to be stuff that we've talked about tonight, like a verbatim, this is your inspection words to use. This presentation, probably going to have a link to hopefully the video of this presentation, because I think there are a lot of things in here that aren't going to come through on the slides. And then also, as you're looking at it, and I do some content creation as part of my job. I know there are several other people on this panel also that do that. I'd really love to hear from you. I am fine doing the web content. I would love to have suggestions. If you want to go as far as putting together the words to go along with it, I will format and do all that stuff. But I really want to keep this from becoming, this is just a resource for those of us. I think this is also a great recruiting opportunity. People try and Google SCA rape, fencing in San Francisco, and there's some really weird results that come up. I want to turn this into something where they end up on our page, they end up super excited, they can figure out who they need to talk to, or at least where they need to show up. That's kind of my vision for where I want this to go, and I could definitely use some help getting it there. Team changed combat cards. This just happened yesterday. So I threw this slide together real quick. We're not going to go over it in detail, but there is a pretty good explanation on this. If you haven't seen it on Facebook yet, it's definitely, I think it's been reposted in a couple of different sites. It will be in this slide deck. This slide deck will be available towards the end of the week.
These are the same cards that they released back in June, right?
Yes.
That
But
is
apparently they've
correct.
been getting
It's
questions.
just an
on it.
explanation on it. Cool.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So, open forum. The end of my presentation. I know that we've been talking quite a bit throughout. Is there anybody that has any questions that hasn't already been covered, or is there more deep diving on specific subjects that anybody wants to do in the last 13 minutes?
I was going to offer folks some understanding as to the two programs, why they're separate, how they got separated, and why melee for CNT and melee for rapier reduced torso are radically different. The melee one is actually very easy. We aren't changing the torso armor for cut and thrust. We're changing the arms, the legs, the feet, which is all abrasion resistant. Because the torso requirements are changing with rapier, we still haven't found a good mechanism for keeping tips on swords, especially in areas that are super hot, like Hawaii, Bakersfield, these other areas of California, the South, the East when it gets super humid. So there are a number of materials that we've been testing. We have a couple that look actually pretty promising. Somebody did some experimentation up in Antier, and It looks promising as far as keeping tips on, but until we can have a solid method for keeping tips on swords, that's why the melee numbers are reduced for rapier and not necessarily for cut and thrust. Also, with cut and thrust, check the kingdom that you're going to be doing cut and thrust melees with. For example, if you come south, Kaid has a melee only by permission of the KRM, and currently for the next month or so, that's me. So we don't always allow cut and thrust melees. It's not something that's part of our normal offerings. If somebody comes to me with a proposal of what they want to do, then we'll run them. But those also tend to be fairly small numbers. Our cut and thrust community is only about 50 people total. So that's the main reason why there's such a difference between cut and thrust and for rapier as far as the melee numbers. I know that somebody had a question on that earlier. Are there other questions I can help answer about the experimental programs?
I think Buffy's got his hand raised. Cesare, do you have a?
Yeah, this is more about youth fighting. We don't really have a Kingdom Youth Rapier Marshal.
Okay.
Do you foresee us, Alfonso, getting one anytime soon?
We do have one.
We do have one?
Yeah, we do. I will connect the two of you.
Please, because I'm getting a lot of people at Thursday night practice who are at the lower end. They're yellow diamond, but they have younger brothers and sisters who want to come out to practice, and I need to make sure I understand everything.
Okay. Yeah, it's Philip out at the practice I attend. So if he's there Thursday, I can talk to him.
Oh, please, thank you. Please hook me up. Because I don't want to
do.
turn potential SCA people away.
Youth combat actually brings up a really great point. So it's very important to understand that if you are under 18, you may not, cannot, shall not, will not participate in experimental programs unless they are specifically tailored for youth and we're not mixing adults and minors together. So all experimental programs that are run through the adult combat disciplines are 18 plus.
Oh, that is a really good point because we have a fairly large number of fighters that are between 16 and 18.
Right.
Okay. I need to make an adjustment to my slides. Thanks, Wendy.
Sorry, I realized it as we were going through it. I'm like, oh, we need to adjust the 18 and younger. It's only so, and if you look at the proposal that Kaid has, and I really recommend that everybody read it so you understand all of the rules of what data we're trying to capture. We don't allow anybody into any of our programs in Kaid until they've read it. And they actually have to say, yes, I've read the documentation that goes along with it. So some of the questions of what happens at a foreign war. I did post a link to all experimental programs. Somebody said it's requiring a login. I'll check with Arabella on that one. That's supposed to be the front-facing link. You can get to it from SCA.org. But that shows all of the experimental programs running across every martial discipline, who the point of contact is, what the program's covering, and the kingdoms, specifically the kingdoms that are involved. So if you are going to a foreign war, you can go onto SCA.org and you can look it up as well as contacting the marshal that's going to be at the event. I think that's all I have. I mean, I do have some things that are very Kaid specific for anybody who's coming down for Rapier War, if y'all wanted to hear that. But as far as like this presentation, we're really looking forward to having the West come back into the program. We do know that we do have to reiterate that there are two programs, and we split off cut and thrust specifically because we didn't want to mess up Donovan's data. So Donovan and his team who run the program out of the East have been phenomenally fantastic in the data that they've been capturing. But when we split the rules up for what's now kind of the lay of the land of arms, legs, feet, and that type of thing, Kaid was running a program simultaneously with the East, and what we have for a rule set is kind of a blend between those two programs. We wanted to allow Donovan's experiment to continue running without making too many alterations, so we pulled cut and thrust out of it. And so that's why cut and thrust is sponsored by Society. The specifically reduced torso in Rapier is still being managed by the East. But we needed to get more cut and thrust numbers. So we had about, I want to say, a little over 3,000 data points when we decided to make the split from the rule set, and that was there wasn't enough data for cut and thrust because the East's program didn't necessarily split it out by discipline. So we couldn't tell which were cut and thrust touches, which ones were rapier touches. And so that's why we had to run kind of the second program that's running in parallel. So my apologies if that was confusing. We started the program back in February of last year. We've been rolling kingdoms into it as they've been requested. Each kingdom has to submit to society that they understand what the program is, and their Earl Marshal and their Kingdom Rapier Marshal has to sign off on it. So the West's been good to go for cut and thrust since I want to say midsummer last year.
I think it was June, late June.
Yeah, late June, early July, when we've finalized all the paperwork for West. So specifically for that program, you can have bare legs, you can have bare feet, you can have bare arms, with the exception of all of the required glove requirements, elbow requirements, back of the head requirements. And if your kingdom requires knees, then that's a kingdom addition to the society rules. Gorget requirements, because those are a little bit different than with rapier as well. But that's why we have the two programs, and that's why the data is separate. Again, we wanted to let the East program continue running as it was running. My apologies for those of you that have been reporting to the East. We can get you to swap over to the reporting form for the cut and thrust that's at society. We can continue to split those numbers out. More numbers, more better.
Yeah, and I'll have updated links here in the next week and a half for everything. All right. Any other questions? Wow.
Getting done in time to let them.
Yeah.
Daryl,
Yep, go ahead.
do we have a timeline of when we might be rolling the rapier reduced experiment back out again?
Everything. So right now I put a pause on the CNT as well.
Right. Everything's paused.
Everything is February 1st.
Oh, February 1st. Okay.
Yep. Like I said, my hope and plan and goal was to try and get us back into the experiment before our fighting events kick off on February 1st for the year. Wow. I again want to reiterate, I appreciate everybody taking time out of their evening to come and join us. Wendy, I especially thank you for joining. I think it was extremely productive to have you with us tonight. Anybody else has any questions, please email me. I think everybody's got me as a contact, but also Rapier at West Kingdom. And I will get back to you immediately. I think I'm going to take some of your questions and turn them into an FAQ, which will go on the website too, because some of them actually are quite interesting and I think have some interesting answers that people would like to read. So again, if there's nothing else, I am going to...
Can I just say, I appreciate the work you've done and the other people in the West have done to get us back into the reduced armor experiment.
Thank you.
It's appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I can say thank you to everyone. Nobody likes to pause playing, especially when we have something as unfortunately as catastrophic as the event that happened at Great West. The West has been a fantastic partner in helping us uncover all the issues, both from a Qaid standpoint. Our marshalates have had a very good working relationship, especially over the last 3 years. So I'm super appreciative of that. Also, as the Society Experimental Weapons Deputy, it always makes me sad when I have to, say, I'm sorry, we're suspending you, especially a neighbor to the north. But everybody in the kingdom has been super responsive. Everybody cares so much. Your hearts are so big. And this has actually been resolved pretty quickly. Qaid is about to undergo a similar meeting with my marshals in the next couple of weeks. So this is a partial mitigation of getting you guys back into the experiment, as well as some marshal issues that had arisen. And I absolutely really appreciate everybody's time. And thank you for being good marshal partners and good fighters when you come to our kingdom.
Daryl, a quick question. I've heard many rumors about the experimental weapons program. Do we even have it here in the West anymore?
Yes, we do. Contact Richard. He
Okay.
him he's the primary contact for the experimental weapons.
Okay, so
It's still going strong down here, that's for sure.
okay,
Yep.
good to know.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and if we need to have a separate meeting on experimental weapons, I'm happy to do that too. I would actually like to do these kinds of things maybe twice a year. And so
Sounds good.
maybe late spring, early summer, we'll have another one and we can focus on the experimental weapons and other things that are going on at the time.
Gotta go.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alphonse.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
Appreciate everybody
Thank
coming
you.
out.
Evening.